Now for the practice section of my lesson, I want my students to practice what I just presented to them. And normally I'll do this through a few different activities depending on their length of time. So I might average about 2 activities during this practice section. Now a very simple and practical activity that you can use is called toss the ball. This is where I get students into a circle, and then I have them toss the ball around the circle and say whatever vocabulary we're practicing. So in this case, they're going to say an animal name. So they simply toss the ball and say bear. And then the next student tosses the ball to someone else and they will say a new animal, such as giraffe, or whatever variation you want to use for this activity. Now I like to carry around this in my bag at all times. This is a fun little blow up ball. It's a picture of the world map, which means I can do a lot of different things with it. So I can show my students where I come from in Montana, or I can have them point to all of their different countries. And so we can actually use this for a visual aid in a number of different ways, but it also makes a fun ball for doing this toss the ball activity. And since it's a beach ball, I can give it a little squeeze and then it will easily fit in my bag and I can take it wherever I go, to any class that I go to. Now, you may have students in your class that like football or soccer, as we call it here in the United States. And so in that case, I've seen plenty of classes where we will get in a circle and we'll kick around a soccer ball instead of tossing around some other kind of ball. One year we had the coach of a national dodgeball team from a country in Africa. And so that year we got this. We got a dodgeball to use for this toss the ball activity. So you can use whatever ball or sport might be most meaningful to your students. And in a pinch, if you have nothing, then you can find something soft that's also in your classroom and toss that around instead. So here's my first practice activity. Now, if I wanted to extend this and make it a little bit longer or go into some more detail, then I could modify this activity. Instead of just practicing the animal names, I could use it to practice maybe something else, such as the verbs and adjectives that they can put together with the animal names in order to form sentences later in this lesson. The elephant is standing on its head. So for this modification of this toss the ball activity, the teacher will point to an animal photo and the students will toss the ball to each other and say matching verbs and adjectives, etc. So they could say things like yawning for a verb, big for an adjective, or 2 ears. So here we've recorded some simple notes to do the main activity, and then we've also added a slight modification in order to extend this activity and get a little more out of it if we wanted. This is a great quick way to review some of that vocabulary that we presented during the presentation section of this lesson. We can do this really quick. So I'm going to say 5 minutes for this activity. Now let's do another practice activity. You might already have some floating around in the back of your mind, some activities that you and your students will love doing and will do on a regular basis. For me, this could be activities such as Pictionary, charades, taboo. But I think for this lesson, because we have these photos here, a fun activity will be Tic Tac Toe. And so for this activity, we're going to get students into 2 teams, Team X and Team O, and we're going to draw a grid on the board. So this is going to be an English class variation of the classic game Tic Tac Toe, or depending on where you're from, you might call this game X's and O's or noughts and crosses. But we're going to do an ESL version of this. And to do that, I'm going to place one of our animal photos inside each one of these boxes on our whiteboard. And I'm going to probably write in the animal names inside those boxes as well. And then our teams are going to work together to form sentences. And I can give them whatever instructions I want here. I find the best way to do this is to give them a simple fill-in-the-blank sentence, what some teachers might call a sentence frame. So I want them to fill each gap with an animal name and an ing verb, such as the elephant is standing on its head. And so the rules of this game are that when a team makes a correct sentence, the elephant is standing on its head. I, as a teacher, I'm going to replace that animal photo with an X or an O. So I'll take down the animal photo and I'll write into the square an X or an O for that team. And we can play this game as many times as we want until we run out of time. And I'm going to give 10 minutes for this activity. Now, it might take longer the first time you do an activity like this just because it takes some setup and there's some rules. You need to understand the rules of the game Tic Tac Toe. But once your class knows this activity, as soon as you draw that grid and you start placing photos or words inside those boxes, they're going to know what to do. And so, although it might take longer than 10 minutes the first time you do this activity, it'll take significantly less time in the future as you continue to do it in your class. All right, so now that we've warmed up our students, we've presented some new animal names to them, we've got them to practice those names and even using them in some sentences. Now it's time to move on to the production section of this lesson. This is my favorite part.